And when you're constantly consuming somebody else's vision, somebody else's life, it is impossible for you to become crystal clear on your vision. Hello. Welcome to Authentically Aligned, a wellness podcast where we speak on all things wellness, from fitness and nutrition to meditation and mindfulness, healing, growth, self-help, and so much more. If you are a new listener, welcome to the podcast. And if you're a returning listener, thank you so much for your love and support. And I want you to know that I am sending you that same love and support right back. Today, the topic of discussion is creation versus consumption. And this topic is really important for me to speak on, especially right now at this point in my life. I actually have been doing a social media detox, a social media cleanse, if you will. And I wanted to share that experience with my audience, and I wanted to share a little bit about why it is so important to be able to understand the difference between creation and consumption and how they interact with each other and play part with one another. So creation is producing something from within. This could be art, this could be a conversation, solutions, thoughts, ideas. Whatever it is, our creation comes from within. Now, consumption is taking in external input. And this could be from the media, this could be from opinions or thoughts of others, this could be in entertainment. Basically, anything that is giving us a thought or an idea that is other than or outside of our own. So there's definitely a balance that comes in between the two of these things. While consumption can absolutely inspire us, there are many times that too much consumption can ruin or put a pause on our own creativity, our own thought, our own inspiration. And I think it's important for us to understand the balance that we have between the two of these things in our own lives, and also how that pertains to what our desires are, what our purposes are, what we are called to do. Because oftentimes we feel that we have this calling, that we're supposed to be doing something. But then what happens is we experience this calling, and the way that we pour into this calling is by consuming or observing or seeing how other people do things rather than coming from an authentic, creative, internal place. And this absolutely relates to the conversation that we had on the last podcast about being in your own authenticity and trusting your own process and being one with yourself, because the way that we consume media in today's world is so much more than we should ever really be consuming or taking in. When we overconsume, we become disconnected with ourselves. When we are constantly scrolling or watching videos or turning the TV on, consuming entertainment, even music is a form of consumption. But when we're constantly consuming these things, it makes it harder for us to hear our own voice. In addition, social media consumption and media consumption create this constant external validation loop that we get stuck in that also plays a part in the way that our creativity diminishes. There is something psychological that goes on in our brains when we're seeing somebody else living their life. It makes us want more. It makes us desire more, but it makes us think that we want things that maybe we don't even want ourselves. But because we're so accustomed to seeing these things over and over in the media, we think that we're supposed to have these things, or we're supposed to desire these things, or these are the things that we need to be working toward. And then in addition to that, information overload leads to decision fatigue, which again makes it harder for us to listen to our own voice. And it also makes it harder for us to act upon our creativity and be inspired by our own creativity. So how do we recognize when we are consuming too much? Oftentimes there are signs, there are symptoms, and the first one could be simply feeling like your mind is cluttered or feeling uninspired. Feeling like you want to take action and you're ready to take action, but you have no idea what that looks like. It almost feels like a sense of overwhelm in your brain, because when you're over consuming, you have so much clutter that's going on in your mind. It makes it so much harder for you to listen to your own path, your own creativity, your own ideas, and then it makes it even harder to act upon them. Because as I mentioned before, this leads to decision fatigue. And instead of making a decision, you sit and ruminate because your mind is cluttered and you're overwhelmed. Another sign that you are consuming too much is struggling to even focus on your creative work. You're not able to sit down and take the time to be creative or have a vision or even see your vision, which then leads to you spending more time watching than creating. And if you are spending more time watching and consuming and seeing what other people are doing and invested in what other people are doing versus invested in what you are doing, you're absolutely consuming too much. And then you also start to experience this cycle of passive engagement versus actual engagement. So oftentimes we say that we are on social media, whether it's to build our business or build ourselves or whatever it is. But if you are on social media to build yourself and be creative and build your business, the amount of time that you spend on social media should be very little. It should be the amount of time that it takes to post and then the amount of time that it takes to interact with your viewers or your followers. And that shouldn't take more than, honestly, I would say 30 minutes. So the fact that we are spending hours a day consuming or over consuming, I think is a huge red flag. And it's something to be aware of. It's something to understand that as we continue to do this, the more and more we continue to do this, the more hours we spend on social media, the more disconnected we are from ourselves, the more disconnected we're becoming from ourselves. And then it gets to a point where maybe we don't recognize ourselves or we don't even know who we are because we are so used to this overconsumption of knowledge, of media, of thoughts, ideas, whatever it may be. So as creators, how do we shift to having a creator mindset? Well, naturally, we are creators. Naturally, everything that we do is a creation. This is human nature. But the act of social media, the act of the engagement, of entertainment, of all of these things diminishes from that human experience. So some ways that we are able to become that creator and shift into that creator mindset, asking yourself, am I using this to create or am I using this to escape? That's the first question. And then in addition to that, setting consumption boundaries, setting limits on how much you're consuming, how much you're intaking, how much time maybe you're spending on social media, how much time you're spending scrolling, and taking note of the time that you're spending actively immersing yourself into social media Or are you passively scrolling, again, to escape, to turn your mind off, to clear your head, whatever it is? Because there are so many other ways that you can clear your head rather than turning on your phone, turning on the TV, consuming information from somebody else. And that leads me into replacing your consumption habits with small creative habits. So rather than picking up your phone, maybe you take the time to sit down and journal. Maybe you take the time to just sit down and free write, or maybe even use your voice notes. Just start talking and speaking, understanding your own thoughts, processing through your own thoughts, having a conversation with yourself. Maybe this also looks like you being creative. Maybe that looks like you drawing or painting. But oftentimes, these creative habits lead us to the connection between ourselves and our creativity. It allows us to process our thoughts. It allows us to process our emotions in a creative way rather than distracting ourselves from understanding what's going on within ourselves. And then I think it's important for us to understand how dopamine affects us and how it affects our nervous system, how it affects our sleep cycles, how it just affects our overall day to day. And when we're constantly scrolling on social media, we're consuming this short form content, we are getting a hit of dopamine so fast to the point where our bodies are not designed to experience that much dopamine. But now, as a generation who consumes so much and has so much accessibility and availability to the media, our baseline for dopamine has, number one, raised, but it puts us in a unhealthy state. It puts our nervous systems in an unhealthy state, and we're constantly feeling like we need. But when you're able to take a step back, take yourself on a dopamine detox, do a dopamine detox, you're able to re-regulate that baseline for dopamine. And then you are able to get excited about smaller things. You are able to enjoy smaller things. You are able to appreciate the smaller, the finer things in life because you are not constantly feeling like you need something. Our brains are not designed to be overstimulated all the time. We're not supposed to experience this overstimulation, but now we're wondering why we're walking through the world feeling completely overstimulated by everything, but it's because at our fingertips on our phone, the overstimulation is happening almost at a constant rate. So how do we do a dopamine detox? How do we start to decrease the way that we consume and decrease the dopamine that we're giving to ourselves? The first thing is reducing social media time, reducing screen time to a set time. Limit that time per day. We all have the availability to set a timer on our phone that will shut our apps off after a certain amount of time. So limiting that time, you would be surprised if you were to go look at your phone and see how much time you are spending on these certain apps doing these certain things. And then if you put it into perspective of the time, what you could be doing better with that time, I think naturally you're going to want to decrease your time, your screen time, the time that you spend scrolling. But that's the first thing. First thing is to decrease the amount of time that you spend on your phone or in front of a screen. And then taking the time to engage in analog activities. This could be writing. This could be in nature. This could be deep thinking. This could be just you sitting in the quiet, understanding your thought. What we don't understand is that boredom allows for new thoughts, new ideas, new creativity to emerge. But when we're not allowing ourselves that space, that time, that freedom to be bored, to be silent, to be still, there is no space in our brains, in our minds, in our bodies to be able to create new ideas, to create new thoughts, to create new actions. And doing all of these things is going to give your brain a reset. It's going to, like I said, it's going to level out the baseline for your dopamine levels. It's going to level out your desire and your need for stimulation. And it's going to allow you to exist in the moment. It's going to allow you to be. It's going to allow you to experience your thoughts and experience your emotions and experience the things that you are going through. I mentioned that this is something that has been very prominent for me, especially in the last few weeks or so. And I've been really mindful of the amount of time that I am spending consuming. I've been really mindful of the time that I'm spending creating or immersed in thought and connecting to myself. And last week, I actually removed social media apps from my phone. So the apps do not exist on my phone. I can't just click on the app and start to scroll. And I don't know what necessarily prompted this in me, but I was just tired of feeling disconnected. I was tired of wasting my time. I was tired of pouring my energy into the wrong things. And I had this revelation that me sitting, staring at a wall, whether my brain has thoughts in it or not, is more beneficial than me scrolling on my phone. Yes, I know we can learn things on social media, on TikTok, on whatever it is, but what about learning yourself? What about learning the way that you think? What about learning the way that you process emotions and having conversations with yourself? What about allowing yourself the space to be bored so that you can allow yourself the space to understand what is going to satisfy that need? Maybe that's taking a walk in the sun. Maybe that's going out to the beach. Maybe that's going up into the mountains and going for a hike. Maybe that's writing down and journaling. Maybe that's creating. The amount of space and energy that I have had to create has skyrocketed because I am not using the time, the energy, the space to consume. And not only that, but I am beginning to become crystal clear on my vision. And when you're constantly consuming somebody else's vision, somebody else's life, it is impossible for you to become crystal clear on your vision. So like I said, these things are going to allow you to create from within. Solitude and self-reflection are so incredibly powerful in your creativity, because when you are able to use your self-reflection and use your solitude to develop these ideas, these thoughts, these are unique. We are all designed to be creators. But what happens is we think that we're creators while we're actually replicating the creation of somebody else. But when you spend time in solitude and you spend time reflecting on yourself, connecting to yourself, the creations that you embody, the creations that you develop are unique to you. They are your specific creation. And there's something so empowering about that. There's something so uplifting and so beautiful about experiencing your absolute own creation rather than experiencing the thought, idea, or creation that was copied or replicated from somebody else that you saw on the internet. It's also interesting because I think a lot of times we see people doing these things and we think, oh, I want to do that. But never once has that thought crossed your mind until you saw it on social media. And I think that as we see these different things, as we see people doing things and then we start to follow lead or we start to copy what they're doing, we're moving ourselves further and further away from our own purpose, because our own purpose has nothing to do with what somebody else is doing. Our own purpose is going to come from within. It's going to be our own creation, our own thoughts, our own ideas. It's going to come strictly from us, not from anybody else. And there are so many people right now who are trying to find their way, find their purpose, step into themselves, and they're lost and they're confused and they're stressed because essentially what they're doing is copying the purpose of somebody else. It's important for us to also recognize that the less we consume, the more connected we are to ourselves, the more connected we are to our intuition. That voice is so much louder. It's so much more clear. And when you're connected to that, you're not doubting. You're not second guessing. You hear something and you know that that's what you're supposed to do. You know that's what you're called to do. But if you don't give yourself the time and space to hear that voice, you're forever going to be stepping away from your purpose. And creating from within requires us to be still. We live in a world right now that is so fast-paced. We are always on the go. We are always running. We're always doing this and doing that and doing this and talking to this person and seeing this person and doing this activity. When you allow yourself to sit down and be still, it's going to drive you crazy at first. But then there is such beauty in the stillness. There is so much space for creation in the stillness because your energy is not being exposed anywhere else but in the present moment. So allowing yourself to be still, allowing yourself to sit still, to still your mind, to still your spirit. Tune inward and listen to that voice. I think in order to prioritize creation, it's important for us to have different strategies to keep us on track and keep us reminded of the task at hand and the ways that we want to create and the ways that we want to build and grow and evolve. And I think that the first thing is prioritizing creating before you consume. So whether that's every single day you prioritize creating something, writing something, journaling something, sitting still before you consume anything else, allowing yourself to sit in that, again, allows you to become closer and more deeper connected to yourself so that when it does come time to create, you have all of the thoughts, ideas, and you're ready to flourish and make these ideas come to life. The next thing I would say is take time and block out time for deep thought, for development, for deep thought. Allow yourself to dive deep into your own brain. Allow yourself to dive deep into thoughts that you may have about others or thoughts that you may have about yourself. Allow yourself to sit in that deep thought because oftentimes that deep thinking also provokes more creativity within us. And then reduce distractions. So I recommend this to all of my clients is having a space where you meditate every single day, having a space where you are creative every single day. And you don't do that act outside of the space. Of course, there are times where you're not in the same space every day and you're having to find other places to practice these things. But if you are meditating in the same space every single day, if you are creating in the same space every single day, that space takes up energy. And it holds on to, it remembers that energy. So then you come and you sit in this chair and it becomes a creative space. It becomes a space where your brain naturally starts to think, starts to have that deep thought, starts to connect, starts to sit still. Or you go sit in the corner and your brain naturally clears and calms and you're able to meditate. But also keeping in mind that as you create these spaces, they take on the energy of other things. So if you are sitting in this chair every single day creating, but then every single night you're sitting in this chair scrolling on social media, they're pushing against each other, right? There's conflict. So finding the time and space to do particular things so that your body, your energy understands this is where I do this. This is the energy that I do this in. This is the space that I do this in. And then the same goes for the lower vibrational things like watching TV, like scrolling on your phone, whatever it is. I've made it a rule that I do not scroll in my bedroom. I haven't watched TV in my bedroom in years. No TV, no scrolling, no consumption in my bedroom other than the books that I read. But having these spaces where we create the energy allows us to step further into that deep thought, into the deep connection, into the deeper understanding. So I think it's important for us to really analyze where we stand on the creation versus consumption scale. And take notice of how much you're consuming versus how much you're creating. Regardless of if you see yourself as a creator or not, we are all creators. As human beings, we are constantly creating. We are constantly developing. And when you take the time to analyze how much you consume versus how much you create, you'd be surprised at the disconnect that you experience. So as we step into this week, I encourage you to take time to consume less. Set timers on your phones, delete the apps, lock your phone, hide your phone away while you take the time to connect to yourself, while you take the time to create for yourself, and while you take the time to grow and develop and understand the most authentic version of yourself. I'm sending you so much love and light this week. Have a beautiful week.